Hello and welcome. This is a pre-recorded training webinar on the graduated approach, which is assess, plan, do, review. This is pre-recorded, so it will cover the SEN register, law, regulations and terminology, the graduated approach, assess, plan, do, review, IEPs, reasonable adjustments, and if it was live, we would have a Q&A. So, with no further ado, the SEN register is a register that is maintained by schools and local authorities to track and support students with special educational needs. This register includes students who require additional or different support compared to their peers. Ultimately, the four core areas of need are cognition and learning, communication and interaction, social, emotional and mental health, sensory and or physical needs. These are the areas that a school would assess, plan, do, refer and review. They do this under law and guidance, and the Children and Families Act 2014 is primarily the legislation governing special educational needs and disabilities in England. Part 3 of the Act establishes the duties of local authorities, schools and other institutions in supporting children with young people with SEN. The Act focuses on identifying needs early, providing appropriate support and involving children, young people and their parents in the decision-making process. Moving on to the SEN and Disability Code of Practice, so the SEN Code of Practice. This guidance explains how schools should implement legal duties under the Children and Families Act. The code specifies that schools must retain a record and maintain the SEN register of children who are receiving support within school. It also outlines the graduated approach schools should follow when identifying and providing support. The Education Act 1996. This section of the Act, which still is enforceable, outlines the responsibilities around identifying and assessing SEN. The Act mandates that schools take appropriate steps to address students' SEN. So, primarily, the assess, plan, do, review process is instigated when, at such a time, a parent communicates with the school and shares their children's difficulties via their perception. At such point, within the SEN Code of Practice, sections 644 to 699, the school should use their measuring processes within school to assess those four core areas of need. The Children and Families Act 2014 is an exercising function under this part. In the case of a child or young person, the local authority in England must have regard to the following matters: the views, wishes and feelings of the child and his or her parent or the young person, the importance of the child and his or her parent or the young person participating as fully as possible in decisions relating to the exercise of said function. Now, without reading those out, the local authority is a government body that administers public services and functions at a local level. You are a service user. They are responsible for delivering various services that meet the needs of the local communities, including but not limited to education, social services and public health. Local councils are made up of elected councillors who are chosen by residents in local elections. These councillors make decisions on local services and policies. The council leader or an elected mayor leads the local authority depending on the local governance model. They are there to serve under these acts. Now, the definition of parent, as defined by the Education Act, section 576, in this act, unless the context otherwise requires, parent in relation to a child or young person includes any person who is not a parent of his, but who has parental responsibility for him or who has care of him. The Children and Families Act covers learning difficulties in terms of special educational need. A child of compulsory school age or a young person has a learning difficulty if they have significantly greater difficulty in learning compared to the majority of others of the same age. The child under compulsory school age, note, has a learning difficulty if they are likely to have significantly greater difficulty in learning than the majority of others of the same age. So the assess, plan, do review process will be used there, but in terms of milestones. Disability, the definition of a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment and the impairment has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities under the Children and Families Act. There is a wide definition of disability and it can cover physical or mental health problems, as well as conditions such as dyslexia, autism, or any specific learning difficulties. But ultimately, if the child has a learning barrier and that prevents them, say, due to anxiety, accessing education, and that is substantial and over a long period of time, then that definition is a disability. Additional to or different from. So special educational provision would be specific to the needs of a child or young person and therefore additional to the ordinarily available provision provided to all children and young people of the same age and year group within school. Examples of special educational provision are special equipment such as hearing devices, seating, writing aids, fiddle toys, or other physical aids. Adjustments to the curriculum, behaviour policies or uniform, therapies, speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Special educational provision. For child age 2 or more or young person means educational or training provision that is additional to or different from that made generally for others of the same age. Special educational provision for a child aged under 2 means educational provision of any kind. Okay, so generally what happens within a school environment, a whole school approach, is you have a SENCO. That SENCO is responsible for coordinating any adjustments or adaptives within the school environment for the child that has been acknowledged as having SEN. So how that would normally happen is, and this is just an example we have here of the graduated approach, is a teacher would be responsible to the SENCO. They need to raise concerns in terms of academic progress, mental health, communication or learning needs. They would be discussed between the parent and the SENCO. The action then would be quality first teaching. So emphasis clearly on lesson planning, differentiating instruction and generating a supportive environment that engages all learners, including those with additional needs. This approach is taken as part of the assess, plan, do review process and should be run for a minimum of 8 weeks. You could be told quite often that you need a few cycles. That is not true if this approach has been applied effectively. Any continued concerns would be obviously communicated back to the SENCO. Potentially the child could be added to the SEND register and more targeted support is applied. Targeted support would be in the form of an independent education plan or similar. These can be named like One Plan, Pupil Passport, or whatever the school title is within that school. But ultimately they are a document with the difficulties, what they're going to do and what outcomes they are looking to achieve. Parents will meet, you will discuss the targeted support, and if necessary you would then apply for an EHCP if the requirements and needs of the child are above and beyond that of targeted intervention based on ordinarily available provision. So, the qualities of first teaching must include high expectations. Teachers have a high expectation for all pupils, including those with SEN, encouraging them to reach their full potential. Ultimately, part of their teacher training is that they will adjust and deliver to all the class so that the child with SEN can access the learning without being singled out. However, it may be that differentiation lessons are adapted to suit different learning styles and abilities that are involving extra materials or extra time for activities. Inclusive teaching strategies that are used to, as I've explained, include all students and ensuring there are clear, visual and timely in order for the child not to be in a negative equity or in a position of inequity. The teachers would do the assessments for the learning and scaffolding. TAs might be involved. Ultimately, this is the graduated approach, all of which is fed back, and whereby a child is still struggling after this approach with intervention over that period of time, then you would be looking to expand and potentially look at an EHCP needs assessment. Now, and it could be that once you have done that, there is specificity that you require a specific school. So the types of education providers that are out there, there's the mainstream schools, which are state funded. There's academies and free schools, special schools, private independent, Section 41, which are named by the local authority under the local authority's governance, pupil referral units, and further education. Now, this particular chart shows you that nobody is beyond the law. Not all of them, but all by statutory guidance, except independent private schools, which don't operate via the SEN Code of Practice, but are underwritten by the Children and Families Act and Educational Healthcare Plans, Equality Act and the Education Act. The SEN Code of Practice 2015. So we've covered assess, plan, do, review. And we've covered when that is instigated by the parent communicating any difficulties and or the teachers feeding back to the SENCO that a particular child is struggling, and they've monitored and measured that over a period of time. Just to repeat, with their physical, cognition, communication or mental health. So what can you do whilst the school are doing this approach? What you can actually do is collate your own suggestions of adjustments to discuss with the SENCO and teacher. You can utilise the resources we have in group, which break down those 4 areas of need. If you remember, they are cognition and learning, communication, interaction, social, emotional, mental health, sensory and or physical. Ensure you agree with the planned approach and suggested adjustments. Ask for clarity on how and who will monitor the adjustments and how they are being followed, and check that any outcomes are smart, that they are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, relevant and time bound. These are the key principles to getting SEN supported within school. Do check in with your child regularly to see how they are doing and make sure to fully listen to both what they say and how they behave. Actions do speak louder than words. If there is an improvement and their needs are being met, fantastic. If there isn't, then you need to be documenting what it is that your child is returning back to communicate, what it is about their day. If you can, check on the school behaviour app Some schools use Dojo, some schools use others. Literally, they will, if you're checking in with the child's feedback and you know what's in the plan, you will be able to pinpoint exactly where the difficulties are arising and why. And also it will help you allocate confidence in the approach that the school is taking, and obviously indeed to establish whether they are doing what they say they are doing. Ensure you meet with the teacher and the SEN code to discuss at least once a term. Make sure to receive copies of the notes from the review. Be confident to challenge and ask for clarification where needed. And if outcomes have not been achieved, ask what further support will be given. Keep up positive communication with the school. This is very important at this stage. So, SEN support plans, IEPs, one plans, my plans, remember they can be named many things, need to have information about the child. So if the child has any diagnoses or if the child has had any referrals and what the suspected conditions may be. They need to detail the primary need. And bearing in mind, this is not detailed on their diagnosis. Any support plan has to be detailed on needs, not diagnosis. However, if they have a diagnosis, it might help you pinpoint those needs sooner. For example, ADHD and executive functioning. So the primary area of need is not their diagnosis, but it could be cognition and learning, social, emotional, mental health, communication, interaction, sensory and or physical. Current levels of achievement, it should not be purely academic. So looking at the social and behaviour skills, the strengths and weaknesses. Make sure the child is accurately represented and that their voice is heard within the IEP. Things that the child likes to do, what aspirations do they have? What do they want to be? What's important to them? And what do they think they need help with? The support and adjustments, for example, could be environmental or instructional, curriculum adjusted, or behaviour and social adjustments. So for environmental, you're looking at breaks, maybe sitting in a particular place in class, reduced visual distractions, and whole class visual timetable. Instructional could be breaking down of tasks, so one instruction at a time, verbal and visual prompts, and clarification on their level of understanding. Curriculum adjustments, use of special interest to engage, advanced math work, similar outcomes, simpler concepts, adjust task outcome to child. Engineering success, behaviour and social adjustments. So TA could support during break time, lunch time, so the child isn't alone. They could instigate a buddy, they could adjust the policy, they could give an individualised reward system, have sensory diets, sensory movement breaks, and a social skills group. Targets need to be SMART. So again, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. A maximum of 4 targets to ensure success. Too many basically confuse the issue. Targets can relate to both academic and behavioural, as we've discussed, and each target has details of how your child will be supported to achieve. That is key. Your input and review is crucial because at the end of the day, if you're not aware of what needs to be done, you're not aware of the difficulties they've identified, then there's going to be no progress made, because you're not going to be able to highlight the differences in past, present and potentially future. Ensure the school keep up to date with all the accurate records of all the interventions and progress. You may need this later as evidence. Do not sign an IEP unless you agree with the content. There is no recourse if you sign or you don't sign. However, by signing, you are saying that you agree to what it is that they are doing. Reasonable adjustments, by example, communication and interaction. So what can you do? You can request the SENCO refers your child to speech and language therapy for a full speech, language and communication needs assessment. Look at the local offer and what services are available. Ask what services your school has access to for supporting development of skills. For example, school, as part of the assess plan do review process, have a subheading which is refer, so they can refer to local offer and often work with local offer to come into the setting and work with any particular child that has difficulties. This can be over a 6-week period or a shorter period, once per week, 1 hour per day, whatever the child needs to work on certain areas. And that could be social, emotional, mental health, perception, communication. So communication support, what could that look like? Visual aids, simplified language, speech and language therapy, regular sessions, use of technology, extra time, quiet zones, desk prompts, leverage on special interests. Social interaction could be structured social skills training, buddy system, supervised breaks, small group work, social stories, special responsibilities. Reasonable adjustments example for cognition and learning. A SENCO can also refer your child to occupational therapy. Again, look at your town's local offer. You can go to your school and ask them for supporting development and skills, what other services they can refer you to, and arrange with the SENCO access to a quiet space if needed by your child. So I'm not going to go through these examples, but we've got examples for dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia. Here are examples of social, emotional, and mental health. What can you do though? If your child isn't already, you can refer to CAMS. Yes, there is a waiting list, but you can ask for an out-of-area referral if that waiting list is reduced in time. And again, asking for additional support from the school in terms of what services they can offer. So support in school could look very much in terms of social, emotional and mental health, peer support system, buddying up, mentoring, sensory tools, health and well-being, selected seating, designated safe spaces. Emotional-based school avoidance. What can you have there to actually help get your child into school? Well, first of all, the SENCO cannot block support for future and they can authorise the absences. The DVA guidance suggests that they should authorise absences where absence is genuine and there are no questions around the reason for those absences. Flexi schooling. It could be that your child could pick the favourite lessons and come into school for those particular days and then play catch up at home. They could have a part-time timetable with a similar process. They could have a gradually exposed timetable. So if a child or young person has been absent, they could be reintroduced back on an ad hoc basis with particular hours, visits, meets, greets, that type of thing. Staggering the start time and finish to avoid the busier periods, and teacher check-ins quite frequently if your child or young person is willing. Now, sensory and physical, again, you will see there's a list of areas here that can be adapted. This is just to give you an example of what school can do. Now, I hope you have followed that process of the verbal webinar with regards to the Getting SEN support in school under the Assess Plan Do Review process. If you have any questions, as always, you can post them in group and our ever-present team of admin and moderators will be there to support you. The next training alongside this is applying for EHCP needs assessment. Do check our website to find out when that next training is. Don't miss out. Thank you very much.